እንደምን አመሻችሁ ቤተሰቦች ዛሬ ደግሞ እንደገና ተገናኝተናል ዛሬ የምንማረው ቶፒክ ከዚህ በፊት አንድ ጊዜ በፊት የተማርነው ነገር ነው ይሄንን ፕሬዘንት ልታረግልን የመጣችው ደግሞ ኮከብ መክዶናልድ ትባላለች ስለራሷ ትንሽ ተገልጽላችኋለች primarily ዛሬ ስለምንማረው ስለ primitive reflexes ነው እንዴት አይነት እሱ የልጆቻችንን እድገት እንዴት ሊያዘናብሉ እንደሚችሉና ምን ማድረግ እንዳለብን ይሄንን ነገር ቤት የሚደረጉ ኤክሰርሳይሶችን ልናሰራቸው የሚያስፈልጋቸው ነገር በደንብ አርጋ ታስተምረናለች ብዙ ሪሶርስም አላት ፌስቡክ ላይም መጽሐፍም ጽፋለች እንደነገርኳችሁ 3 መጽሐፎች አሉኝ ዛሬ እኔ ለእናንተ ለመስጠት የተዘጋጀሁት ከሷ ጀርባ ታያቸዋላችሁ 3 መጽሐፎች አሉና ለቤተሰቦች እንሰጣለን አንደን ጥሩ ጥያቄ ለሚጠይቅ ቤተሰብ ብያለሁ በደንብ አቴንቲቭ ሆኖ ጥሩ ጥያቄ መጨረሻ ላይ ለሚጠይቅ ቤተሰብ ይሄንን መጽሐፎች እንሰጣለን በጣም ጥሩ ሳነበው ነበር እኔ ዛሬ በጣም ጥሩ አይዲያዎችን ይነግራል ያስተምረናል እና ባካችሁ ሁሌ እንደለመዳችሁት እንትናችሁ ልጆቻችሁን ምን ድምጽ ብዙ መስማት እንዳይኖር እንዳይደበላልቅብን ሚውት አድርጉ ስልካችሁን ሁላችሁም እና ዲስራፕት ያደርጋል ደግሞ ስልኩ እንትኑን ቪዲዮ ሬኮርድ ስለምናደርገው ቪዲዮ ሬኮርድ ሲደረግ የልጆቹ ድምጽ በጣም አፌክት ያደርጋል እንደማረግና ባካችሁ ሁላችሁም ቪዲዮአችሁን ሚውት ያደርጋ እንትናችሁን መጽቢያችሁን ማይክሮፎናችሁን ሚውት ያደረጋችሁ ተሰሙናላችሁ ኦኬ ኮከብ this is go ahead and teach us
Hello. Hi, my name is Kokeb G.Mcdonaold, and we'll share my screen here, and then we can start. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, great. Let me know if you can see my screen.
We can.
Okay, great. Okay, so today I'm going to briefly talk about, okay. I'm probably can let people admit people here. I'm going to briefly talk about primitive reflexes, which is really a foundational movement pattern that we have in our body, and it's really essential for parents to learn about. And we'll learn the main thing I want you to learn today is what you can do at home to help your child's development. And all we're going to do it is first, I'm going to help you understand what these reflexes are. It might feel like it's complicated, but it's really not. So there's so many activities and exercises you can do that are simple for you, and you can easily incorporate at your house. So a little bit about myself. My name is Kokeb G.Mcdonaold. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I've been a therapist for 18 plus years. I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. They're 8 and 6 now. And so I started a clinic in 2011 or 2012, I think. And by the time I had my kids, I slowed down my work. And I had a couple of C-sections. Okay, so there's a reason I'm telling you all this. I had C-section, and I knew what the time when it was about, there's an emergency C-section, and I knew my kids were going to have some problems because most kids would go through C-section, they miss out in the natural progression of the birthing process. So I knew they were going to be affected with the retention of some reflexes. And we found out that's not the cause of it for their eye and vision issues, but we find out that both of them have vision problems, crossed eyes, so we have to go get it treated. And then I found out that I have to do all these exercises that I've been training and teaching parents. I had to do it myself. And that's when I found out like it's really, really hard as a parent to do home programs. And I decided to create, okay, if I'm a therapist and I have all these years experience and I have a hard time having my kids to do these exercises, then that must be really, really hard to have just a regular parent who's working full time to do home exercises. So I decided to start creating these 5 to 10 minute exercises that parents can do at home, and start giving it to OTs and parents. So it started to grow. We have right now about 4 books that are out. All of them can be done by parents. It's really self-explanatory, and you can do it, and explains what these reflexes are and why they're important. So I recommend that if you're a parent, to know that there are some options for you as well. So very fun way to do exercises, and also to understand what these primitive reflexes are. And if you have any questions about that, and then we can talk about it later. So for today, what I want you to, the objective of this talk is like how to improve your child's sensory processing. These are the things you're familiar with, right? Sensory processing, learning difficulties, motor delays, and behavior challenges at home, right? So what are the things that you can do, and what are the things that you can look for to, and then learn more about these primitive reflexes. Okay, so we're going to talk about what are primitive reflexes. Okay, so what primitive reflexes are these involuntary movement patterns that every infant, right, so typically developing, or every child, like, we're born with. Okay, these movements are emerged in utero while the mom is still pregnant, and then they're present at birth, and we need to be able to see this reflexes, and we'll talk about a few of them so you understand. And these reflexes are a survival mechanism that nature has it for kids. Like, for instance, we talk about some of them, like the rooting reflex. You brush their face and they turn, they start to suck, and they hold their hand and they grasp, right? So, but there's a lot more of these reflexes in the body when infants are born, and we need to see that for the first year. That's how the baby responds. That's how they relate to the environment. That's how they understand, get information, and respond to their environment. Okay, so all these primitive reflexes should be dormant at a certain point. They're not the same time, but at a certain point, these reflexes need to be dormant. So when you have your baby, if you remember, your doctor will check some reflexes, like the Moral Reflex. They start a reflex, or they see if they're responding. They see if they're gonna, suck, right, or swallow, and all these things, right? So it's important that we see these movement patterns. If we don't see these movement patterns, we're gonna see a challenge for the child's development in the future. Okay, so one of these funny pictures, but one of the common ones, I'll list a few of them for you, so you can, if you can remember when you just had your baby, what the responses were like. If not, that's okay too. So one of the reflexes called the Moral Reflex. That's when, this is actually one of the most important reflex, because this reflex helps the child take the first breath, right? So when the child feels like a sudden drop, or right after the baby's born, they start to cry and start to breathe. That's the Moral Reflex is a key for that development to happen. You're familiar with this reflex, right? So when you touch the palm of your child's hand, they grasp you, and then you can literally lift them, right? It's not because they're strong, it's just the reflex is responding, right? Everything they're doing is involuntary at this point, right? It's not going to the conscious brain. Everything they're doing is involuntary. So for instance, this reflex will be present from birth to about 3 or 4 months. You can still hold on to their palm, and you see that. But by 5th or 6th month, this reflex should be dormant. When we say dormant, it means it should be, when you touch the palm, the child should be able to still open its hand. If not, fine motor starts to be affected. Okay, so This is one reflex that you'd be familiar with. Of course, this is the first thing kids do right after they cry or they'll pee, and which is a reflex that helps them to do that too. So another one is like when you stroke their face, they'll turn around and they start to suck. And then there's another reflex that is involved as well. They start to suck and eat. That's a survival mechanism nature put there. It's a reflex. The child is not doing this voluntary, it's involuntary, okay? There's another reflex you're familiar with. This is called the Atnr reflex. You don't need to memorize this at all. I'm just giving you an idea what these reflexes are and how important they are. This is another reflex. It's present at birth as well. It helps with the birthing process, right? And when the child turns the head to one side, the side the child turns the head towards extends, while the opposite side right here will flex. Okay, this later on will help with rolling mechanism. It helps with eye-hand coordination. It will help with auditory processing. Okay, so, and a lot more, the visual perception, crossing the midline. There's so many things that helps with, and also with the birthing process. Okay. This is another reflex you're familiar, you might not familiar with, but this is called the spinal Gallant reflex. This is a reflex that when you stroke the lower back of the child will bend, side bend. Okay, this reflex is very important because we see kids who still, you're probably very familiar with the symptom of this reflex. This reflex, when it's stroked, helps the child bend to one side. When it's stroked to the other side, it'll bend to the left side. But if you stroke both at the same time, it elicits, it kind of makes the child to start to pee, right? So if you want your infant at this time, you want them to pee or go number 2, or you want to elicit that. So that's why sometimes when this reflex is still present in the body with older kids, they become bedwetters for a long period of time, right? So and then they become fidgety. There's a symptoms, negative symptoms that will happen if these reflexes are not dormant, okay, and not integrated in the body. So that's one reflex that they might be very fidgety on their seat. They might have very tactile defensive kids. They might be very picky with the type of textures they wear. Some of them might want their pants really tight or really loose. So, or when they sit down, if they touch the back of the seat, they're always wiggly. So sometimes we call them ants and pants, because they're always wiggly, they can't sit, and affects concentration. This is later on, okay? This is later on if these reflexes are not dormant. So we obviously see it early on, but after that, we don't want to see that, okay? We don't want the child to move involuntarily, okay? The SDNR, this is another reflex. So when a child is about 6 months of age, they start to go on all fours, like on hands and knees. And with this reflex, what it does is like when the head goes down, right? So the upper body will flex. This is a reflex, right? Again, it's involuntary. And when the head looks up, the upper body tends to straighten, and they sit on like this, on Sphinx position. Another name for this is called Sphinx position. So when it integrates with about 6 months or 7 months, these reflexes start to integrate, and the child will learn to go on all fours, and they start to crawl. So when we see our kids, right, so when they skip either crawling or if they have improper crawl, we know that something is amiss. Okay, so we want to have them go through the process, be able to integrate these reflexes, so voluntarily move, right? So we talked about these reflexes being involuntary at first. So for the voluntary to come, these involuntary movement patterns need to be dormant, right? If not, if it's not integrating, the child will have a hard time crawling, right? So that's something you will see. So this you see about 6 to 7 months or so, you start to see this. If not, you might see your child sitting on their heels. The only way they can sit up in the classroom might be if they sit on their heels. If you tell them put your feet down, they might slouch because the reflex is still present in their body. They're not able to move independently, okay? This is another reflex. It's the opposite. So when the head is back, the whole body goes in extension. When the head is forward, the body goes into flexion. You might see this a lot as well. You might see more with cerebral palsy kids, especially this one is so like low tone, but usually it's very hypertonic that they have a hard time. For instance, if you have a hard time, I think every mom or dad have a hard time buckling your kids on the car seat, and then they arch their back and it feels like they're stronger than you, right? So they're only 2 years old, right? But you're having a hard time. You have to fight them to buckle them down. So the trick is actually, that's a reflex. That's this reflex. The trick is actually to bring the head forward and immediately it gives in, right? But if they put their head back and they can arch and they can hold, the reflex can hold them, right? So that is the TLR reflex, right? So that one doesn't integrate in the body till about 3 years old. So that's why you usually parents have a hard time buckling their kids when they get to about 2 or so, because the kid is like really fighting to be buckled. So overall, right, so there's a lot more other reflexes. What I want you to learn as a parent is like, what are the benefit of all these reflexes, okay? So one thing is like they assist in birthing process. So if by any chance your birthing or the birthing process was stressful or hard or difficulty, that might affect the integration part of it. But they begin to start integrate in the body early on during the birthing. So it's a healthy birthing process is ideal. They're necessary for the infant's first year survival, right? So if these reflexes, if they don't come in, or let's say you have a premature baby, right? So they didn't go through the developmental, and then you will see these reflexes being faultily, they're not really present at all during the first year. So the development will start to be affected later on, okay? And they're building block for the infant's development. Like, so if you think of gross motor, fine motor, visual motor perception, sensory processing, speech, emotional behavior, social development, all of these are there, the foundation. That's the first thing that comes is these primitive reflexes, okay? So we definitely want to see them, but we also want them to go through the developmental order, and at a certain age, a certain month or a year or a couple of years, we want them to be dormant, okay? So how are these reflexes integrated, right? So birthing process, early childhood movement, more movement, okay? So you see infants usually do these very universal movement patterns, right? So on all fours, you see kids rocking back and forth for a long period of time before they start rocking. So that is the brain and body integrating these reflexes, right? So you see them do the first year. You can go anywhere in the world, all babies do the specific movement patterns. That's the brain practicing and going through these natural process in order to integrate and learn these movements, okay? So the more the more the child moves, the better for the brain development. So you want them to be on the floor, you want them to be playing, you want them to be crawling as much as possible. Let them move, okay? Explore, that's how they learn. So you have to explore, give them more time, especially if they're delayed or they're premature. We want to give them extra opportunities for them to play, to explore, and repetitions. So with our children who have missed the opportunity, or for whatever reason, we just have to give them extra. Okay, so that's the best way to get to the brain is movement, because through movement, you can access pretty much all part of the brain. And that's the best way, that best tool that you have, okay? And when this reflexes become integrated to the body, more coordinated. Sorry. All right. So when these primitive reflexes become more integrated and more coordinated and mature movement patterns start to develop, that's what we call the postural reflex. Okay, so for the child to be able to stand, to walk, go against gravity, all these postural reflexes start to develop. In addition to that, all the other development also lies on top of them as well. Okay, so we definitely want to see these reflexes present, and afterwards we want them to be integrated, and then the more postural reflex starts to develop. So if you're thinking like 0 to 3, you see the primitive reflexes being high. So they start to, so this is involuntary movement, and the child purposefully starts to move against gravity, starts to reach right by 3 months or so. And then you see more voluntary movements and postural reflexes and perception and everything responding to the environment start to increase, while these primitive reflexes start to decrease in time, right? So with certain situations like brain damage, stroke clients or so, you start to see these reflexes coming back, right? We don't lose them. They're still present in our body, right? So they will still stay there because they're the pathway to all development. But what we want to see is that they're actually dormant and more a controlled movement, more voluntary movement happening, okay? So postural reflexes are mature patterns of responses that control it. When we're working on balance, motor coordination, sensory motor, or sensory integration activities or so, we know that we're going back to, if these foundational patterns are not dealt with and they're still active, you will see challenges. Okay, so all these balance, coordination, perception, visual motor, sensory integration, the first primitive reflexes, then everything built on top of that. Okay. So when retention happened, I like this scenario because it helps us understand, because when these reflexes are still retained, imagine, right? So imagine when you're, if I have kids like 2nd grade, 3rd grade, right? So when we're working with them, we've screened, we'll screen them, right? So if these reflexes are present and we stroke, and one of my clients, I will stroke him. So every time I stroke his face, he either gets very irritated and doesn't like it, okay? Or he's like turning around to almost grab, and he doesn't even know he's doing that, right? So he's turning around to grab, responding to this rooting reflex, right? So of course that child has speech delays. He has a very picky eater, right? So he has a difficulty, production of his speech, and sometimes even put things in the mouth, right? Because that is what the rooting reflex has done, right? So, but then still we have to go back and work on that reflex to make sure that he's not reflexively moving. Or let's say the child is like 5 years old or 6 or 7, even older kids. I work with even high schoolers, right? So every time they turn their head to the right or to the left, you see their bodies slightly move. Like every time they let's say he's copying from the board, and every time he looks up, and his upper body will be straightened, right? Extend or flex, and then they start losing their spot. And then they press really hard, right? So, or they can't copy from the board, or they can't play sport, because every time they turn their body to a certain direction, their body's reflexively, it might not be very apparent because you have to have the eye in a screening method to start to screen and to see these things. But their body is reflexively moving and it's involuntary. They cannot control it. Okay, that's the tricky thing about it, is like, even though in their mind, they want to do the activity, right? So every time I turn, if my body's going reflexively and I cannot control it, it's going to be really difficult, right, to learn. It's going to be difficult to play sport. And then later on, sometimes behavior starts to happen because now I'm frustrated. Now I'm old enough to understand my friends are better. And then there will be a refusal and other behavior starts to develop. Okay, so sometimes you start to see, depending on the age, right? So these holes, the more they're working on it. So they have to, if you want to fill this bucket, like you keep losing water, right? So you're never going to fill it up, right? So it takes a lot of water, or you kind of have to kind of put a lot of water to get to the top, but eventually you're going to lose out, lose energy. So what you want to know for you, okay, so what you want to know is how are these reflexes affecting your child? So this is exactly what I talked about, right? So fine motor can be affected. Any child with fine motor delays, we check, right? So we screen them. Why is this child have a poor grasp? Okay, what are the reflexes that we need to work on? Because we want to go back and work on the foundation instead of focusing on skill after skill after skill, right? If the foundation is correct, if you're building a house, building anything on top of that will be easier. But if the foundation is faulty, it's going to take a lot of energy to get any task done. Okay, so it's be frustrating for the child, it's frustrating for the teacher or anyone, right? So if it's a parent. So all these things you look at, like how they affect fine motor, gross motor, auto processing, visual development, balance, coordination, sensory processing, even social skills. Now, because some of the kids, let's say, with some of these reflexes affect the fight or flight response. Okay, every time that the body's going into protective mode, the moral reflex is one of them, for instance, and it creates another emotional challenge because now the child is afraid to go outside because they cannot process their environment, right? So with the auditory, the overload that can happen. So sometimes the easiest way, the best intervention can be to going back and work on the foundation so that the body is not, again, responding reflexively, okay? So when we work on individual skill instead of foundational skills, this is what kind of will look like. Sometimes as an OT that at first, before I learned about reflexes, we worked a lot on skills. Like I have to teach one skill after another skill. So it's almost harder to discharge a child, a client from our case because we're teaching every skill and it's taking us a long time. And my question is like, why do I have to teach each skill? While another kid naturally picking up all these, what am I missing, right? So the child should be able to naturally, easily learn. What is it? What is the one thing I can do that can help him pick up and learn easy? And that's where, like, I first found out, like after 2 or 3 years as an OT, I start finding out, okay, instead of working one skill after another skill, let's find out why the brain is having a hard time understanding what is the foundational thing we can do. So learning other activities is going to help them. So when I worked with clients and when we work with reflexes, what parents usually say is like, once these reflexes, we start to integrate it, and they're saying like, oh, other activities become easier. They say like, oh, he's having an easier time sitting in class now. Oh, homework is not as tiring anymore, right? So they're not working so much to get one thing done because you get tired, right? Like we all be tired if it takes like 100% concentration for me to be able to kick a ball, for instance, right? So I can easily just kick a ball and not feel like I need like a full body attention, right? So other things, other skills start to become easier, right? So instead of working skill after skill, my advice is to find out the root cause of these challenges. And the best way I know so far to do that is really going back to the foundational level and working on these reflexes. And the best way to integrate these reflexes of the actual and the postural reflexes is by mimicking early childhood movement pattern, which is great for us because it doesn't have to be complicated, right? So nature has it. Nature is best, okay? Nature is best. And already there's a reason all these movement patterns were created. There's a reason these babies, kids, infants go through these movement patterns. And following that movement pattern and mimicking these childhood movement patterns are the best way to help the brain integrate. So what we do is pretty much, even I worked with adults who are like 65 or even years old. And when they come to me for a session, I tell them like, hey, the brain and body is the same. So we're going to crawl and we'll do like the movement pattern that the brain needed to integrate and work. And I kid you not, the client that we worked with, that he can never do like jumping jacks or coordinate, has difficulty or driving or visual perception difficulty, even though very successful, a lawyer, it doesn't matter, right? So we learn to adapt, but a lot of anxiety and fear because of the perception of the environment, he was able to do that. But we really did, I mimicked the exercises that we're doing for the pediatric. We just used it with adults. It doesn't make difference, right? So it's the same thing. Our brain and body is the same, so we can still access it, right? So that makes it easier for us even to teach, right? So to do home programs for parents, and how to do it is it doesn't have to be that difficult sometimes, right? So we can do it. It's just the trick is exactly what exercise to do. Okay, the trick is like, okay, which activities to do or to focus on, and then to target. But if anything fails, I say like just take your kid to the park and have them climb, have them crawl, do the crawling activity, do jumping jacks, anything to get them moving, and instead of sedentary. Especially right now, it's hard because the computer, iPhone, and it's very difficult, and they can get really sucked and addicted to that. So as much as possible to getting them out and doing exercises. And the best way to do it for kids is through play. Okay, the more they play, that's how they learn, and a lot of repetition. We do have a course for parents. I forgot, Leah, to tell you that. Something, if you're interested, you can definitely do that. I have 25% off for parents here if you want to do it. And then this is where Leah will talk to you more about it as well. So we have a lot of exercises that you can do depending on different reflexes that you want to target, and activities you can do. Like even here, you can see that can be like jumping jacks or climbing. Let's say with some of the reflexes can be like jump rope, right? So there's a reason these activities are harder for some of our kids. That's because when the body cannot, when they are having a hard time voluntarily moving their body, we want to ask why that is and which reflex we want to target and integrate. Okay, I highly recommend, obviously, to see a specialist, right? So your occupational therapist or whoever that you see, to make sure and to have us. Actually, Leah, I will also give you some checklist. That's what I should have brought here for parents. Yeah, so we will. I will give you a checklist that you can use to kind of see for your child, like what are the symptoms that they may have and which reflex you want to work on. Okay, and then I'm gonna stop sharing here. So I have let me see, some exercise. You want me to show some exercise or take a question, Leah?
I would like you to show us some exercise, and then I see some questions already, but
Okay.
show us some exercises, please.
Okay. All right. We will go through these exercise. I'll briefly go through these ones so you get an idea. So see. Okay. So one of the reflex I talked about, I told you about, is when the head turns to one direction. Okay, this is obviously his older boy, and these reflex should have been integrated by 4 months or so, right? Like the Atnr, when he turns to one side, he should be able to keep his arms straight. So one exercise you can do is a wall push-up. First, I want to make sure that he can be able to do a wall push-up without falling. Upper body strengthening, right? And then what I'm going to ask him is I want him to turn his head to one side. Now, when you look at this, see the difference between the elbows. You can see, like, the minute his head turns to me, his right elbow buckled a lot more. So you can't hear me. I turn off the volume, and I've been working with him for a long time. So I was telling him to fix his elbow. Right, then he fixed it, because he's saying, okay, yes, I get it, you know. Here he's been working on that, so it's easier. But usually I have kids, I just have them turn to one side, they literally fall off, because the entire right side will buckle because their head turned to one side. And you can see that's involuntary. I just have them hold a plank and say, look at me. They look at me and they will fall, because they cannot maintain the opposite side to stay straight. Why is that? That is because this reflex is still present. So one exercise you can do with your child, you can try that. Okay, try this activity. Another one is, okay, actually, let's do this one instead. The crawling, this is a really, especially for kids who are a little bit hyper, can't sit still, everything is fast. Why is it fast? Because slow is hard. Slow is actually hard. So every movement, they have to zoom through it. So with crawling activity, okay, I have to slow them down. So I give them a weighted bean bag or something. And then I put it here because I want to trigger the spinal Gallant reflex, right? And especially kids who are very tactile defensive and can't sit still, it will be really hard for them. So I'm having him crawl without dropping it, okay? And we've been doing this for a while, obviously. So I'm working on crawling, which will help with the STNR and right and left side discrimination. I'm slowing the body. By giving him something to carry. Otherwise, he'll go fast. But more controlled movement is actually best for the brain. And then going backwards, obviously, is a little bit difficult because the brain is not used to that, right? So by doing activities, especially crawling, what 6 months old babies start to do, what it helps is with the right and left brain working and coordinating together and working an asymmetrical position in a way that is opposite. Okay, so the child needs to go through this because you can see that the right and left side of the brain have to work together, and sometimes an opposite way, and sometimes together, like the right arm and the left leg have to move together, you know. So that's why we want to see smooth and controlled crawling, because it's really key. It's really key for brain development. Okay. Another activity you can do is you can do like a snow angel. This is a good one as well. Again, you're looking at coordination, smooth movement, right? So with the kids who are really fast, sometimes I use metronome or I clap, I have them move slowly. With the kids who are more involved, because not every kid is going to be doing it, you're going to have different level. With the kids who are involved, this is after working on for a while, right? So I can actually verbally coach him. But first, when we start, I have sometimes with some of my kids, I have to tap and show them or touch or move their arms because the brain doesn't know which right as which left. But by giving them tactile cues, I can start to engage with the brain directly. So when you're working on reflex integration, just know remember, it's not voluntary, it's involuntary. So consciously telling might not help. So you might have to give physical cue and always think that you're trying to connect with the brain. Okay, the brain to be aware of what's right, what's left. So this is advanced, obviously. But the more you start to see your child more coordinated, you will see other skills start to improve, right? Concentration starts to improve, being able to sit still start to improve, learning skills like reading and writing, speech development starts to improve, right? So that's why movement is really key, because by just doing movement activities, working on these activities, you will, I guarantee you start to see result in other skills as well. Here's another one you can do. This is popcorn on floor. You can do this for the Moral, the TLR as one of, so I'm asking him is to lift his head off the ground, because most reflexes are triggered by the head movement, which includes vestibular and visual and auditory processing as well. So what I want him to do is being able to lift and hold this position, okay, in popcorn, and then holding it, because most kids, they might not even, depending on your child, they might not even be able to lift their head. They might rock to one side or another, right? They might not have good flexion and extension, like the back and the front, and not even with muscle tone. So they might not be able to do it. But using this activity, you can be able to work on some of the reflexes like the TLR or even the Moral Reflex. If again, your child is not able to do this yet, you physically support them. So you know where your child, it doesn't mean they can't do it at all, but what you will do, like even in some of our cases, what we do is we physically help them hold it and then slowly reduce the physical cues that you give them. Okay, so the head would be the last thing. Sometimes the fear, because with the Moral Reflex, it's really hard, that the sensation of looking back can trigger anxiety and fear, and they might shut down on you. They might not do it. So usually I bring my hand behind their head and always support them. And so my level of support might be different. Sometimes the touch gives them the calmness to know, like, okay, I'm not gonna fall. So they'll be able to do it. Sometimes they might not have the muscle strength to be able to even lift yet, because they've not been working on that. So I might support their head and get them to hold this position for a while and get their brain and body to develop, okay? And you can do these exercises, like they will take like less than a minute to do some of these exercises for 5 minutes a day. If you choose like one or two of exercise, you're doing 5 to 10 minutes, or let's say 5 minutes a day, and you increase the frequency. Remember we talked about is like increase the frequency repetition. Like babies, infants, you leave them, they're constantly moving until they fall asleep, right? So the brain needs that. And that's how brain plasticity works, the nervous system and the myelination works. So for you to do at least 5 minutes, you actually will see results, okay? Here's another one, superhuman, right? So just having them, let me see. Okay, this one is a little bit advanced. We're doing the swimming, but you can also do just, I don't know if I have it here. Okay, this is a little bit advanced, but you can do this too. But depending on where your child is at, you can just start with holding the Superman and holding to see if they're able to do that. Usually I do this activity after I know that they can hold a Superman with straight knees, right? So we don't want them to bend, but be able to do that. And later on, we're working on alternating. So we're working on the TLR reflex, like the back extension, head control, right? So we're working on that. And then we're working on bilateral coordination, all these movements, okay? And then I think we can see back. Yeah, okay, so then we couldn't have time. All right, so the hand, there's one activity you can do for just warm up. You can start hand, okay, the progression of hand opening starts from the pinky. So you can start opening the hands from the pinky and closing from the pinky. So you can start just alternating, right? So going in order, being able to, you can even see with the adult here, she's having a hard time a little bit and isolating. You can just work on hands opening and closing, okay? If your child is not able to imitate you, that is part of the development that you want to have. If they're not there yet, then we do hand over hand. Like I literally hold my client's hand and I lift here and then we hold. Okay, one, like maybe 5 seconds or 7 seconds. And I, lift the other one, we hold. So I'm creating that pathway in their brain, right? We be able to do that. Okay, so you can start by complete maximum assistant physical cue and slowly reduce in time. Again, just think of frequency. Do it like multiple times a week and see where your child is next time, okay? So these are the exercises you can do, and we can go to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kokeb. Can you read the questions?
Let me see. Okay. Questions. Okay, how do you help with toe walking? Toe walking can also be from the TLR reflex, the tonic labyrinthine reflex. That's the reflex that I talked briefly about. I think I have it on the 4th book. I don't have it as the orange one. The TLR is the one when your head goes forward, the body goes in flexion. When your head goes backwards, the body goes in extension. And sometimes with the TLR backwards, what happens is that those who have, let's say, retention on that reflex, they tend to be toe walkers. So with toe walkers, we tend to work on those TLR specific reflex and working on integrating that reflex. So you can do walking on heel walking. So instead of walking on their toes, we do heel walking. We work on what's called the Babinski Reflex, working on if they have the foot grasp or like when you stroke the bottom of their child's foot, usually they flare out. We want to see if that's still present or if it's still, or maybe do not develop correctly. So we test that and to see if that is the case. And then we work on walking on uneven surfaces that you can work on as well. Depending on where your child is at, you can figure out where he, just working on those exercises at least first. So it's a very common one. Even today, we're talking about it with the therapist that I work with, how to do toe walking. And we can, I think those are the easiest one for you to do. See if your child is can stand on their heels, because sometimes the longer they go, like the older they become and they're always on their toes, what happens, like we'll have secondary issues, which is tightness of the calf muscles, right? So we want to also make sure that we're stretching their calves as well. So other things that you want to work on will be stretching their calves, making sure that that calf muscle is not hyper, contracting as well. Could you please post this video on Facebook? Yeah, so all this training that is recorded right now, so you can be able to access it. You can talk to Leah about that. When you say slow and fast, the leg body physically movement. Can you ask that question? Can they go?
Yeah, and they can ask in person.
Okay, when you say slow and fast, the leg body physically movement or hyperactivity mentality, like, I think you're asking Mahi, I think. So some kids, they prefer, the reason fast is easier with kids, fast is easier. If I say, if I'm telling you like, okay, walk on the balance beam, if you go faster, you be able to balance easier than if I say heel to toe slowly. Because when you do slow movement, you have to activate more muscle, more control, more balance. So sometimes not sometimes, most of the time we want to slow the movements in order to work on their balance, coordination, and focus, right? Kids who are hyperactivity, and they have a hard time slowing down, right? So slowing down and focusing. So with our exercises that we do, we want to slow them down, learn for the brain to slow down to do specific movement instead of rushing through it. So that is something you can do. You can slow them down by adding like some kind of auditory cues like metronome, right? Usually I'll start my super hyper clients, I'll start them with a very fast, kind of fast enough to match their energy, and then slowly reduce the metronome, like slow it down. So if we're doing jumping jacks, if we're doing whatever we're doing, so I want them to match, and then like also concentration and focus. I want them to match their movement with the auditory cue that they're getting. I hope that helps.
Kokeb, explain to us what a metronome is.
Oh, okay. Metronome is just one of those. A metronome is a musical instrument that tells you the beat. Like it's like this. So sometimes you can download it on a bunch of apps. Musicians use it to know how fast their beat needs to be, right? So how fast is the beat per second, right? So sometimes the beat can be like that's like all that you hear is like that kind of metronome, right? So and then you don't have to rely on your verbal cues or clapping with. So sometimes I just use a metronome that they follow, and then we can reduce the beat. So from like going really fast, then we slow them down. So now they have like, I don't know if you can hear my snap, but then they slow down. And then the auditory cue will be the metronome they're hearing. Sometimes if I don't have anything, we do clapping, or I count 1, 2, 3. So every time they jump or they're crawling or whatever game we're gonna do, I want them to slow down and stay with that beat. So yeah.
There's a direct question that came to me saying that, can any OT do evaluation to know exactly which reflexes we need to work on? Is it a specialized OT that works on primitive reflexes versus any OT?
Yeah, it's going to be a specialized OT. We were not taught this at school, unfortunately. So when you look for specialists, just ask whether or not they can screen your child or know how to work on reflexes. That's the best bet. And depending on where you're located, you can look for an OT that works with reflex integrations. My son is 5. He's going to be kindergarten. He can't hold pencil the right way. How to help him, please? Okay, so there is a grasp pattern that needs to develop, right? So every movement is the natural progression. Usually infants, they start like this, not infants, babies, right? So this is okay, a certain age, right? So we don't want to stop them, and we don't want to rush them either, right? So sometimes we rush them in holding, and they start holding wrong because they were rushed. They were not ready to be coloring and writing at 3 years old. Sometimes they're given too early. So let them explore and play a lot at that point. But for a 5-year-old, I can see that, you know, he should at least be able to hold this way, right, in pincer grasp. So you want them to go through the grasp pattern for them to do. Definitely talk to a reflex integration specialist near you so they can, you know, if they do the reflex work. I wanted to, something you can check easily for screening, right? So we can screen for these reflexes, right? So when they're relaxed, and have him open his hand, right? So open his hand. Let's say I'm relaxed and sitting like this. Just take like the tip of your pen and then just slightly stroke here. And sometimes what you see is your child will like do this. Sometimes they might grab it altogether because the reflex is still present, even not old, even older kids. I have kids like will grab it. Or sometimes it might be like just like a tiny twitch that you're gonna see. And sometimes what you see is when you're testing one, the other one is mimicking. It's mimicking, right? It's like motor overflow is happening here. So see, if that's the case, then you're gonna have to work on the grasp reflex as well. So you can just do the activities like hands opening and closing, and making sure that they can, easy I have them do is like have like twinkle twinkle game with the little kids, see if they can alternate open and close. You can do that at home. Definitely talk to your OT and see if you can get them, you know, get them screened. That's another thing you can do as well. Oh, great. Somebody posted a metronome here on YouTube, so check it out. If the child is mild to walker, does it mean the child has primitive so see, these response can be mild to severe, right? So we want the more functional way. So the brain is very obviously super smart, right? And it's always accommodating. It's always accommodating. So sometimes you can't see it. Sometimes a lot of adults, actually, a lot of adults, they walk around, we walk around with these retained reflexes. You might have like some kind of accident that can happen, that can be a car accident, or that can trigger or bring this retained these reflexes up again. Okay, it can be trauma, it can be anything, right? So but it can be mild, but then mild is still a problem. Then the brain has to keep compensating later on, right? So it's still primitive reflexes, right? So you still want to test and see how they're doing. So the older they are, the more, you know, complex activities that we can do. But I don't know the age level, age here, but depending on the age, you can do more play-based. My idea is like do a play-based, age-appropriate activities in order to screen and to see which activity is more appropriate for your kid. Okay, so how those activities could be done with receptive language, imitation, delayed toddlers. What age do you suggest for the most part? Like you can start working on reflexes as early, right? So like I have clients, for instance, of therapists who work with early intervention. Of course, by 6 months, we don't want the STNR integrated yet because we actually want to see it, right? So if the child is not able to go on all fours, then we want to help the brain and help the body to do that, right? But when it comes to language and imitation, definitely have to talk to the speech therapist as well. But what we know is pretty much most of these reflexes, when let's say the core strength, there's no core strength for the child, it's not able to if let's say that I'll name one, the TLR, right? So the TLR is the flexion and the extension of the body, right? So when the reflex is present, so every time I'm like this, my whole body is going to collapse. Or when I'm like this, I'm not evened out, right? I'm not even, so I will lack muscle tone. Like those are the kids, you see the walking posture, the sitting posture is affected. They're slouching all the time, or sitting on the W sitting, they're compensating consistently, right? And if I don't have tone and I don't have good tone muscle on my neck, right? So speech is fine motor skill, because when you're talking, the receptive part is different because that's me understanding. But for me to express and speak to you, I have to use my muscles, right? So breathing, lung, muscle, right? So muscle control. I need to be able to have good muscle tone on my neck, on my tongue, and to have these fine movements, right? Speech is a very fine movement. So and it will affect. So all these kids that we work with, most of the kids have speech delays as well, right? And the same time, we talk about right and left side coordination, right? The receptive side and the expressive side, right? So it's a different part of the brain. So the more movement you do, the best bet as a parent is do more activities, play outside, right? Do the screening and see which reflex do you want to focus, you should focus on for your child, and what are the exercises that you can do, right? Eye-hand coordination activity, do like visual screening. That's one of the things that is missed a lot, visual screening, right? So with right and left side coordination, you have to always remember vision as well, because the eye teaming is involved as well. So you can do balloon toss activities, for instance, that can help with the vision, right? So slows down the movement, so the child is working on teaming and working on movement. So my advice is do a lot more movement outside, play structure, but observe. The best way is that observe, see how your child moves and see how your child compensates. And it gives you a lot of answers just by observing. And when you go to your therapist, when you're going to whoever you're working with, when you go to your therapist, you can say like, okay, these are what I'm seeing. This is how he's moving. He's having a hard time climbing, so he tends to scoot up instead, right? If you want to learn more, I do have a course for parents, introductory course for parents. You're welcome to use it. I'm gonna give Leah the discount just for you, and for about a month we keep it there for you, so you can access it and learn more about like more breakdown of these reflexes and what you want to look for each of the reflexes and their symptoms to look for, and activities you can do as well. Okay.
Kokeb, there's a question about brain balance. Do you recommend, because they do address primitive reflexes? So any thoughts on that program?
I can't say much about it. I think the best person to talk to them will be them. So I won't be able to give you much about that, but any kind of activity that works with coordination and exercise, you can't really go wrong, in my opinion, because think of more natural progression. Kids go out, play, climb, and that should be fun, right? So kids would do it and because it's fun, right? So you don't tell them climb this way, that way. They just explore. So giving them the opportunity to do that is best. But when they're not able to do that, it tells us something. Like they're having a challenge, right? So they're having a hard time accessing their playground. They're having a hard time participating, or them having a hard time with the social interaction piece, or not understanding, or they're afraid because of the auditory overload, because they're not able to access their environment, right? So play is their main like occupation, right? So what occupational therapist is the child's occupation is play and learn and social skills, right? So if they're not really accessing their environment and learning and exploring through movement, then it's going to be challenging. Then any exercise or intervention that involves a lot of movement, I'm for. I'm not against, so depending on what activity. So the only thing will be knowing the progression that you want to work on, or really tackling these reflexes and learning to integrate them with the specialist. So that would be the difference. Okay. Any question?
There's just one question that came up. How can we help with the child who continually jumping and pushing walls and chain fisting?
Chain fisting?
I don't know.
Like fisting like this?
Chin, okay.
Oh, chin fisting.
Yeah.
That's more of, that is kind of common with some kiddos as well. So the jumping, and so that is, I need more of the child and why, so we definitely want to know a history with your therapist and give them more history behind that. When with pushing walls, jumping, chin fisting, all are deep pressure, right? The jumping definitely has the vestibular aspect of it, right? The vestibular input part of it, but they also have deep pressure that's happening. So with some of my clients, if they're nonverbal, if they're verbal, you can actually ask, right? Usually these tends to be sometimes with nonverbal kids. With one of my clients later on, we found that has other issues that he was not able to express. We found out like he had like gut issues and pain, and the more we start addressing the pain and that we did not know, his aggression kind of went down, because every time after he eats is when his aggression was coming up. That was one. The other one can be just seeking proprioceptive seeking activities. But if it's like more like aggression part, I want to know more of what is causing that, right? So usually is a lack of the challenge with communication. So imagine like you can't express yourself, and then you get frustrated, right? Like normally, like any of us will be. And then how do we express it with some kind of aggression? So it's better sometimes to kind of back off a little bit and understand when does this situation occur. And that gives you a good data for you to collect and talk to your therapist about it. Because I bet he's not doing it 100% of the time. He does it more during this time, or during this activity, or right after this activity, and then you can start to figure out what is causing that frustration part of it, if it's the aggression part of it. And then, or even the jumping, like when does he, like his body needs to get energy out, when is that? And with some of our clients, we do like movement breaks, like it's like a sensory diet that we do, like what are the activities that consistently we can give them, their body feels calmer, right? So we all have that, right? So we all kind of get up and move around, take a drink or water, or go exercise to get our body regulated. So giving them or creating that for them as well, just understanding like when does that happen. So that would be my question, if if a client comes to me, I want to know when that happens, how often. So now we start to figure out why. Okay. Okay, does your book help us identify which primitive reflex that we need to work on? So the way I wrote it, because I wrote it mainly for parents and therapists that are working specifically on this. So each book kind of present one reflex and a lot of activities for that reflex and variety of ways to address it, and screening for each reflex. And with the online course, we go through multiple reflexes and videos and training on that. So in that one, you can get an idea of where your child might fall into. So each book though talks about, like, the yellow one is on the Moral Reflex, the blue one is an Atnr, the green one talks about the SDNR, and the orange one is like the CLR. So and we're working on the Spinal Gallant book right now. So it's like individualized, so to give more option for therapists and opportunities to access different ways of doing the exercises for parents and therapists and teachers in the classroom. So depend on which one you work on. So my advice would be like, I'll send the screening one. Each book has a screening to get you, like, a pre and post screening that I give out before you do the exercise, and then retest about 6 weeks or 8 weeks to see the improvement of your child. You can do that as well. If you want to learn more, then you can do the online course.
Okay, would you have that screening available for us? Send it to me so I can share it with them on Facebook or Viber. Okay.
Yeah.
So the person that asked the question about the book, you want a book, I'm going to send you a book. Like I told you, I have 3 books. And then the first person who asked the question and who just subscribed to our YouTube, you know who you are, I'm going to send you a book. I know who you are, so I'm going to get your address. But the person who asked about the book, I don't know. I'm not sure. I have so many people by that name. I'm not sure. I'm going to send it. Please contact me, Lianing, 214-533-0933. And the third person who won is the first person who's joined our group today. And you know who that is. Person lives in Dallas. You know who that is. So the 3 people that want the books, I'm going to send it to you. Thank you for all the questions. And I think we have a few more questions. I think one came up.
You want me to send you the link for the online course if they want to join?
Yes, send it to me and I will put it on our Facebook. And I think there's a question of what is the basic activity you can do at home with age 11 to 15 years old boys. And that's kind of general question.
That's a good age, actually. You can, I would want to know, like, depending on, I would not know exactly because I don't know what level of development they're in or they are at. You can start doing, I always start with crawling. I know for everyone, I want to see if their development, or we do cross crawls, like being able to do this and imitating, if they can twist and be able to do that, or we do scissor jumps and to see the coordination aspect of it. I usually do a quick screen on the client and see what we're working with. And with older kids like this, you want to do age appropriate activities, right? So after school, and one thing you can do is also after school programs like soccer, or even going to the park and doing activities in soccer or tennis. Like with tennis, for instance, it's going to be hard for kids with ATNR retention, because their body, every time they turn their head to one side, they won't be able to go against their reflex. But even if you don't know, right, like which exercises to do, but you can actually, in the book, you have a recommendation of activities you can do for extracurricular activity. That's one. Another really good, I always recommend, if you're going to do extracurricular activity, these are the ones I usually recommend. Some kind of martial arts, especially with the kids who have more hyperactive ADHD kids, right? So older kids, I recommend martial arts or karate activities, because it really helps with integration, right? Even though they're not focusing on that, it will challenge that. Works on breathing technique, calming, self-control, body awareness, like it hits on all these things. During summer, swimming, like swimming is really good, because, and you see with kids with certain retention, you see why they have a hard time, because like if they have STNR retention, for instance, they really will have a hard time lifting their head off the water and being able to float, right? So they have a hard time staying, you know, one of the exercises I showed you is like doing the Superman. Like that will be really hard with kids with reflex retention, because every time the head is up or the lower body might flex in, the STNR might kick in. So some kids, the only can, you know, swim underwater, but cannot lift their head off or have a hard time on their back. But, right, so, but for you as a parent, giving them opportunities, right, like to be able to do that in time will help integrate as well. Making sure that they're outside as much as possible, doing all these activities. So you can do swim, you can do karate, you can do, you know, throw a ball or play baseball, activities, just outside movement. And then you start to see which one or what they're interested in. Because if your child is not interested, especially a teenager, if they're not into it, it's going to be hard, right? If they have low tone, and going hiking and getting the stamina going as well. And then by certain age, you're going to have their collaboration. You can't force them, like the little kids, to do these activities. So you have to do age appropriate activities as well. So you can do some of the exercises you will see. Well, I incorporate some Pilates work, some yoga activities that can also help with the coordination, body awareness. You can incorporate as well. Yeah, then you can do those. Hopefully that helps, but definitely have to be age appropriate for them to want to cooperate with you. So what can we ask our OT to do to improve on his running needs and screaming, shouting needs? He's 4 years old. Okay. So the question is like, okay, so we're running. I know I talk about crawling again, but you know, the cross crawl that we talked about, being able to go opposite and being able to do this kind of movement starts with crawling, right? So I will go back and see like which milestone. I forgot to tell you this. So you want to go back and if you can remember what milestone your child did not go through, right? Some of our kids miss certain milestone, let's say the crawling, or they did not stay on it for a long time. They went straight to walking, and early walkers. He's, you know, my kid is 9 months, he's already walking. But usually it's like a red flag for me. I was like, oh boy, you know, because we actually don't want that, you know, in a sense, because we want the child to take their time to develop, their brain to develop. When they rush through it, they miss some valuable lesson in there, right? It's valuable integration. So you want to go back and see what are the things that your child missed. It can be like with the rooting and reflex, you might, if you had a kid who was very colicky, feeding was hard, breastfeeding was hard, that was so difficult. That was kind of telling you too, like they'll have some kind of challenges and some of his integration aspect of it too. So I will, to improve that, I will do more movement activity to help him. Like I will ask the OT to work on a lot of activity you can do at home. Like especially if you're seeing therapists, I advise parents to observe, to sit, don't sit outside, but watch what your therapist is doing, because they're getting results, right? So imagine if you can do 1 or 2 of those activities at home, eventually you're going to cut your costs, because you're doing the same activities at home. You're multiplying the frequency, increasing frequency, and your child is improving faster. Instead of like once a week he sees a therapist, you should always observe, be there, and see and ask, okay, what are the exercises we can do, or more parent-friendly exercise. It doesn't have to be the exact thing she's doing or he's doing. You can actually do something that can support whatever he is working on. So I would ask specifically your therapist, because your therapists know more about your child, and then do that at home. Okay, is there anything I can do for hand flapping for my 7-year-old son? So that's a tricky one. That hand flapping can be different things. Stimming, that's one, but it's also when you're doing this, you kind of creating a vestibular, also with kids who seek vestibular input, right? So they either spin things in front of them, or they spin themselves, or they spin something in front of them. So sometimes giving some movement break or sensory diet, we call it sensory diet or movement break, whatever you call it, that also helps with vision, right? So if he's craving or seeking more of vision input, right? So he's doing it by looking at it, right? So you want to do activity that is more appropriate that he can do. So it can be that you doing swings, like simple thing as a parent, you can do swings or spinning, dizzy disc, you can put them on at home, but very timed, and definitely talk to your therapist how to do it. You don't want to get them dizzy, but if it's visual input that he's seeking, you want to be able to give them that, and more appropriate activities that you choose that is okay, or something that spins that are appropriate. There are fidget toys that spin, that gives them that input as well. Office chairs, right? So you don't need some fancy equipment. You can also use office chairs to spin in certain directions as well. You can do. He only crawled for 2 weeks. I think I may have jumped. Yes. So yeah, you want him to crawl more, right? So he had skipped the opportunity. So right now is to do some kind of crawling activity. Sometimes it's hard, obviously, like to get your kids to do these activities. So we want to turn it into some kind of fun way to do it. So if there's like a tunnel you can crawl through, or you can do like at home, it's not even to go buy things, or like sometimes my kids put all the dining room table and they crawl under it as a game. That can be a tunnel, right? So crawling under the table, something to getting him like crawling on the floor, or army crawl, making it fun, joining up, something you can do, so that will be helpful to go back, because the brain needs that. And then if he's older, then you can do the cross crawls where they're standing and you tapping knee, and you crossing and tapping knee, and then you can work on that and see if his brain can even know the opposite. So usually what you see kids doing is like tapping the same side like this, but what you want is the twisting and being able to identify the opposite side. So depending on the age, you can do that.
I think you skipped one.
I did?
I think so. Maybe How can we help a child who is constantly tapping on his body? Did we do that one? Tapping on his body or bounding chest or head, or bouncing a ball on his
Oh,
head. Yeah, bound.
Oh yeah, I did. I just skipped that.
Eat all the time. This is also a retained reflex issue.
Was constantly tapping on his body, chest, or bounding balls on his hands. Bounding balls? What does that mean?
Bouncing, maybe?
Bouncing? Crunching teeth? You mean grinding his teeth all the time? So grinding teeth can be tension too. So I mean, that's an additional thing. Not everything is just a reflex. Sometimes it's other things that are happening too. So definitely talk to your doctor. Okay, so definitely want to talk to your doctor. So you might have to put like a teeth. What do you call it, Leah? I forgot the name of it. You put on night guards or something. If your child grinds their teeth, because some kids have really do that, and they start to erode their teeth, so that cannot be safe. But it can be tension as well, or stress as well. But there is a reflex called the Babinski reflex. So every time you stimulate the inside of the hand, the mouth opens, right? So you go like this, the mouth opens. It's called the Babinski reflex. So you will see that with some of your clients or your kids sometimes, that when they do something, their mouth is moving with it. Like they say they're working on scissors, that like I have kids, like every time their hand open, their mouth is opening. Okay. And so sometimes what I will do is, if they're grinding their if there's tension here, you can definitely massage the TMJ and here, right on the joint right here, like down, not up to close it, but more like down. But sometimes you can also give pressure in the palm of the hand for the Babinskis in order to relax the jaw, right? Again, you definitely, I mean, I'm giving you ideas, but you definitely need a skilled therapist to work with, right? So I'm just giving you ideas that there are activities you can do to work on it to see if that can help as well. But there are some tensions and that can be created because of some of the reflexes as well.
I think
so if an occupational therapist wants this kind of, you do provide training for OTs in this area, right? So we can send them to you if they have some interest in helping our kids that we feel like need this type of support.
Yeah, so what I do is I train therapists, especially those who are like starting their practices, and we do a weekly, and send them my way, because I'm behind the scene helping them with their cases and helping them with their implementation and screening. And I just don't have time to see clients, but individual parents. But you can do the course or send your therapist to me. Okay, did I miss anything? My son never crawled when he was a baby. He used to pull his body to move places. How often should I make him crawl to resolve the problem? As much as you can. See what you can handle. Like right now, just see if you can do once a day, if you can do like a 5-minute crawling activity. The crawling with a beanbag, playing as a game, that is something my kids like, and most kids like. We can play like rescue the animal. That's what we do. You have to, there is an ocean, you have all these, stuffed animals, you're gonna have to rescue them. So you put them in your bag and, just make a game out of it. But your goal is for them to crawl, but then for them, it has to be fun for them to do. So I'll do as much as you can. But don't feel like you have to do like a ton, overwhelm yourself, because if you're stressed, it's not helpful either. So if you can manage to do like 3 times a week, If that's something you can do, you do it. If you can do it every day for 5 minutes, then do it as well.
Okay, a direct question came to me. My son is 9, he can't jump. What activity do you recommend?
That's a good one, because I would definitely will want to know his Babinski. That there's a reflex that works on the flaring. I'm wondering if I test him, he probably have the foot grasp. Like if you touch the bottom of his toes, he might like go into grasp, or he might not even have it, or like the wrong reflex might be triggered, right? So I would do the checking for, if you go to your therapist, ask for Babinski for grasp. That's something you want to check on that. And then after that, actually, once the Babinski starts to integrate, the kid starts to be able to go on their toes and be able to jump. So if you probably have tried like trampoline and getting him to do all that activity as well. And another thing is possible that he has gravitational insecurity, not feeling afraid of falling. He might have vestibular issues, challenges as well. That's something you need to see, whether or not when his head goes up and down, if his body, especially if his the moral is strong, like every time he looks up and down, like if he's like, feels anxious. I don't know. I'm just guessing at this point because I don't know your kid. Something to look into. So these kids with the moral retention, for instance, they really have a hard time climbing up and down play structure. They're very reserved. They're not the ones who are going to be the daredevils, right? Like they're climbing and jumping. They won't do that. They even will have a hard time looking up, right? And then because they feel like they're falling. So that'd be really hard. So kids like that might have a hard time jumping and leaving the ground, the sense of security. Possible that he might have some kind of anxiety as well, because you want to feel like grounded and safe, because that's the first thing kids will do, right? So when they're standing, their focus is like, oh, am I walking? Then after that, when I feel secure and safe, then I can explore and play. But if I'm always on guard, whether or not I may or may not fall, my vestibular system is not functioning really well. So I'm anxious and reserved. My even visual cue field might go narrow. Like I won't be aware of what's happening as much peripherally, not aware of my environment, might get easily threatened, right? So if I'm only focused on this, not aware, so a child comes towards me, I might get, jumpy in a sense, like, feeling scared. That can happen too. So it has some kind of domino effect, right? So those are the things you can do. Have them tested for those reflexes. Babinski, I'll check for foot grasp. And other reflexes I probably want to know more about, like the TLR and the moral reflex. If it's like a fear of movement and fear of falling.
So, Kokeb, I think at the beginning you mentioned mouthing. I don't know, when you were talking of one of the reflexes, I think I have a question that came here about nail and finger biting, I guess, when he's not even nervous. And then I got a call also on my phone about chewing t-shirts. I mean, a lot of times we think that is sensory, but, I believe from what I understand, these reflexes, the trained reflexes can cause problem with sensory issues, right? And being able, so mouthing is, I know chewies and we've done a lot of things, but I have even adults that have problem with putting in t-shirts and, all kinds of things. So what would you suggest for that?
Yeah, so there is a reflex, like the development is a certain age, the infants, whatever they see goes in the mouth. Right? So that is developmentally appropriate, that for that age, right? So they're exploring everything through their mouth. It's also one reflex that's why, like the Babinski reflex I was telling you, sometimes when you stimulate the hand, right, so that mouth will open. That's part of the what happens, like most kids, especially that mouth a lot of stuff, they do it when they're not consciously thinking about it. Right? So they do it when they're thinking, where they're zoning out, they will grab something, next thing you know, it's in the mouth. Now I'm not consciously thinking like, oh, I'm totally grab my t-shirt right now and start chewing on it. That it's not going to my frontal lobe to tell me like, that's a good thing to do. You know, it's like I'm thinking about something, next thing I know, I'm biting my nails, right? So one of the reflex that you know, sometimes why putting giving chewies doesn't really resolve it as much. It's like we're not really addressing the foundational why the need for that, right? So some of the reflexes we see in other ways as well is seeing that, hey, whenever something is in their hand, like I have a client, like he will put anything in the mouth to the point that's really dangerous. Like, so then we have to accommodate and we give him gum. I rather him chewing gum or a chewy than other thing coming in the mouth, right? So that is okay. I'm not saying don't accommodate or provide appropriate thing, but there are reflexes that are connected to that as well, which is called the Babinski Reflex. That is connected to the mouth and the hand. So that is one. So kids with that, or retention with that, with kids or adults, you might also see speech delays. Some of them might even have drooling or tone issues. And the older they get, some of the reflex, what we see is if it keeps staying in the body, some secondary symptoms starts to develop as well, right? So some of them might be like being, or like the rooting reflex, if it's still active, that the need to putting, you know, things in the mouth continues to develop as well. So sometimes we see other things like even some research, some of the trainings in Muscadova, they talk about like even overeating can be one of it. Chewing a lot of stuff can be, a nail biting can be one of it, or some kind of eating disorder, like something like it's related to, or smoking can be, that's another oral input that we're getting to the mouth, right? So that can also be, yeah, part of it. So you can see how powerful it can get when it's still active. So definitely have check, you know.
Question.
So some quick screen you can do with the rooting reflex is like when your child is like not anticipating it, kind of quickly just kind of stroke, like you know, you can do a brush or like the tip of the pen, you know, just like quickly go down and see, you see response. If you have a child with like oral sensitivity, like a lot of sensitivity, picky eaters, they will not let you brush their teeth, you know, that, you know, you can see like they'll be like very irritated, like I will not let you touch me. So then you can do like desensitizing, because you want to desensitize, you don't want to like overacting, right? So you definitely want to desensitize. So you definitely need to do activities on the face. So yeah, definitely ask your therapist to screen for that.
You talked about desensitizing. What do you suggest we do, or what kind of things would you do, like for kids that are having a problem brushing teeth? That's a question I get all the time.
Yes, definitely. The simple one, the easiest one that I recommend for parents. I try to do for home programs, try not to overwhelm parents because you're already overwhelmed with everything, right? So one of them, the easiest one is using electric toothbrush. Of course, that's the last thing, they don't want the buzzing and everything. So sometimes some kids would like it and they'll like bite on it because they want so much input to the mouth. Some of them will not let you. So you're gonna brush their teeth anyways, right? they're going to brush their teeth anyways. So it will be easier. It's going to be easier to incorporate those exercises, activities during brushing time. So sometimes you can just start having them by holding. If they're super sensitive, just having the holding, and then just going up closer to the mouth eventually. Like follow where they're at, right? So don't rush it and see how far you can go. Next time it can be like, we're not going in the mouth, because when it's in the mouth, you can't see it. And if they're having perceptual issues, like they can't see it, they're worried, the sound can be aggravating as well. So go closer, right? So sometimes it can be like desensitizing. For speech therapists and even oral activities as OTs, when we co-treat, we use a Z-Vibe, which is like that little tool that vibrates and we can put in the mouth and have them desensitize them. So a simple tool for you, for parents, is just an electric toothbrush, and then slowly get to the mouth, and then have them hold it and have them see if they can actually start brushing their teeth. And I bet it would be harder to go to the dentist as well, because their cleaning machine is it's the same. It's very louder too. So that's one activity that I tell parents. And another one is called an exercise called the Kitty Whisker, as pretty much is to have them do an exercise like a whisker on their face, right? So you're doing we're stroking to see one side and the other side. And I have clients, they will not let me get near their face. Then I'll have them do that to themselves, like working on the face, and try to desensitize. It can be when you're washing their face with a cloth and getting to desensitize and doing that. So something you can do. Then after that, your speech therapist might go inside the mouth and work on inside as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
All right, welcome. Okay, let me see. I think I've answered most questions here.
Yes, seems like it. I can't see anything else. So tell us a little bit about your Facebook group and your trainings. So if whoever is, I think there's quite a few people that are interested. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I currently, what I'm doing is I'm training therapists, like my mentorship. I have a mentorship program. I write the books, and the book is appropriate for parents, teachers, and service providers. They use it as treatment plan, treatment tool. Parents can use it as a home program. So as the therapists are working with these reflexes, the parents can also do the home activities, and that is one way we're doing it. We have a parent, I can share my screen. We have one parent course that we do, that's how to support your child's development at home. Just to giving you pretty much as an overview of the reflexes, what reflexes to do, guide you through the foundational movement patterns that you can do. We'll go through 7 basic reflexes, the main ones that we see the most, and the signs and symptoms of these reflexes when they're retained, and also the benefit of these reflexes, then the signs and symptoms that you can see, and activities that you can do, step-by-step activities you can do. So I have that just for parents. That's one program that I have. The rest is mentorship and coaching program that I do for therapists and clinics. So I work with clinics. I go and it's all online. We train them how to screen, how to observe, and how to treat these clients. And we meet on a weekly basis, and then we go through the screening. Some clients I oversee, and they share with me their cases, and then I break it down for them and what to exercise. So those are the things I do. That's my daughter.
All right, Kokeb, thank you so much. I know back to family time. We appreciate you so much for this enlightening and very informative presentation. Okay, so hope we'll have another session where we can talk more about the different things, and we'll have question and answer. Maybe we can do this every year, and we can have